Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the Detroit race riot and other race riots that occurred across this period of time. So basically, 1943, it lasted only about 24 hours, but it was an extremely destructive riot. 25 African Americans and 9 whites were killed in the violence. 17 of the African Americans were killed by the police. It began when white tram drivers refused to share their positions with African Americans, despite the fact that they were low on staff. And on June 20, it was mostly white Americans who were rioting at that particular time. We also have the Zoot Suit riots. In the summer of 1943, servicemen, local California resident sailors, policemen, and others ranged Los Angeles. You can see they meant business in that photograph there, searching for men wearing zoot suits who, the press alleged, were behind gang violence. Zoot suits were favored by Hispanic men, and you can picture those. They're the big wide zoot suits. I suppose they were made famous in The Mask with Jim Carrey. Another film that you won't have seen that I can mention pointlessly, and you will not have seen, but it's those big wide-shouldered and quite wide-trousered zoot suits. We also have to talk about Japanese internment. It's referred to the forcible relocation and internment of 110,000 Japanese nationals and Japanese Americans, or Nisei, to housing facilities called war relocation camps in the wake of the Pearl Harbor attack. An executive order number 9066, and you'll have read this in my article that I posted on HIS381, authorized military commanders to round up into military areas that they're rounding up Japanese Americans and Japanese-born citizens, but anybody from Japanese extraction to put them into these camps. General DeWitt issued public proclamation number 1, informing all of those of Japanese ancestry that they would be, at some later point, be subjected to exclusion orders from military area number 1, essentially the entire Pacific coast to around 100 miles inland, and anybody who lived there who had Japanese ancestry was put into these camps. The anti-Japanese propaganda shows that this World War II was in many ways a racial war. It was motivated entirely differently than, for instance, Germany. Nobody talked about wiping out every single murdering German, but the Jap was talked about murdering Japs were going to be wiped out, and this was motivated, as you can see from the very caricatured drawing here. Go ahead, please take day off. That it was very much about a racial war. There are some other ones. If you worked as hard and fast as a Jap, we'd smash Tokyo a lot quicker. And it shows a sort of evil-looking worker there, and how the land of the rising sun, in the way that it would be caricatured later after the war in Soviet factories. But there was a real fear. This is interesting because it incorporates this fear that the Japanese were much more efficient than than Americans themselves. And basically, it shows anti-Japanese propaganda uses that sort of underliving fear that the Japanese are a much more efficient race and that they're going to take over from the white race. It really played up to that racial fear. Whereas if you look at the anti-German propaganda, it talks in much more ideological terms. And the bad German is always Adolf Hitler. It never has ordinary Germans. In fact, there's the ordinary Germans cowering under the fascist dictatorship, fight for freedom. So the two were motivated in an entirely different way. There is some extra sex education just for the lads. Here's a good thing. I can choose. Here's another moment of the film that I will see whether you actually are paying attention by whether you looked at this particular film. So anyway, that's the end of this, and I will really relish to finding out what you think of viewing these things, whether they're too jerky with 5-minute business, or whether they're just as good as looking at me anyway, and me lecturing. Thank you.